chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome along to Teachers Talk Radio for this special interview with Michael Gove. Just before we kick off with our interview today, I'd like to mention our fantastic sponsors and supporters at Teachers Talk Radio. That is AQA. AQA know teachers are the real experts in the classroom, and that's why they work closely with teachers like you, combining your insight with their assessment expertise to create resources, tools, training, and guidance that genuinely can make a difference. They're the UK's most chosen assessment organisation, so the chances are you already know their work. And as we head into exam season, AQA are focused on helping teachers feel supported and ready. And if you want to find out more, you can visit them on their website. And our other fantastic supporter on the show this evening, Hachette Learning. They're publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. And you can level up your professional development today and visit them at hachetlearning.com to explore the full range of titles. Michael, thank you ever so much for doing this. Before we get started, I thought I would ask a key general question, which is quite important for us to know. If you intend, like some of your colleagues, to defect to Reform UK?
No. I have no intentions of defecting. I don't think they would have me anyway.
You don't think?
But no way. But in any case, no. I've since I was 18, I've been a Tory, and I'm afraid even if I'm the last one left, which I'm sure I won't be, I'll still stay one.
Michael, we're going to go through in the interview today lots of the things you did when you were Education Secretary, or certainly as many of the key things as we can. And you pushed through, I think, some of the most radical curriculum and structural reforms that we've seen in decades. Looking back now, what do you think you got wrong?
I think that we didn't do enough. So the standard critique is that we failed to take the profession with us, and that we were in too much of a hurry, and that we were needlessly abrasive. And I've often thought about all of those things. I actually think that we had a great opportunity to change things, and we did introduce a number of changes that you mentioned. But if anything, I think that our problem was that we didn't go far enough, fast enough. And I know that that will be for many of your listeners and viewers and subscribers a sign that perhaps I haven't learned anything from the past, that I'm not just unrepentant, but doubling down. But I do think that almost everything that we sought to do was right. I've mentioned some of the things which were flawed in execution. One of them, for example, very early on, was the cancellation of the Building Schools for the Future programme. But even though, of course, that was flawed in execution, I think that the overall principle was right, that that was a misallocation of capital spending that was better spent on repairing school buildings more quickly and making sure that we had new schools in the areas where good school places were required. But please throw back in my face any of the issues where you think that I'm being either complacent or revisionist.
Well, we've got an hour, Michael, so we'll see what comes up in the next hour. As I mentioned, you pushed through a lot of radical reforms, and you mentioned just then that, you know, I don't know whether you're saying that you didn't take the profession with you, or do you feel like you could have taken them with you a little bit more? Because we know in 2013, you used the term the blob to describe parts of the educational establishment. Do you regret using that term?
I think the term was already in existence, and maybe using it might have offended some, but I think that wasn't the main issue. I think the main issue is that if you're saying to any sector or any profession, we need to change, there is an implicit criticism in that. I was always careful to try to say that we had the best generation of teachers ever in our classrooms. And I think indeed it's only gone on to improve since then. I think it was demonstrably true. And I was always keen to highlight outstanding teachers and senior leaders and give them the praise that I felt that they deserved. And right from the beginning, from our first white paper, The Importance of Teaching, one of the aims that we had was to stress that what happened in the classroom was critically important and what teachers did was transformational. However, there's always a problem when you're pushing forward any type of reform, right, left, radical, or whatever, that people don't hear the praise; they only hear the bit of the sentence after the word "but." When you go on to what it is that may need to change or what you believe does need to improve, and even if you're saying that improvement is about giving teachers greater autonomy or demonstrating greater ambition for the profession, then people do hear that as a criticism. But I think you're right that the term blob became used as a means by which people were suggesting that I was talking about the entire teaching profession, when I tried to stress that what I was talking about were people in the education faculties of some universities, some people at the top of the unions, and then others who were involved in the educational debate outside it, like the late Ken Robinson.
What was it though about the blob that made you call them the blob? Because you mentioned these people in the universities and the union leaders and so on. What was it about what they were doing at the time that made you call them the blob?
Well, the phrase had, I think, originally been used by Bill Bennett, who was an education secretary under President Bush. And the phrase then became adopted here in the UK to refer to that group of people who, A, favored a form of instruction that was a pedagogy that was progressive. And of course, that word can mean different things, but who favored child-centered teaching, for example, over direct instruction, who were unhappy with the idea of anything that might be viewed as competition within education and anything that might be viewed as the separation of children into sheep or goats, a variety of different positions. Now, I recognize that not everyone who was characterized thus would hold all of the views that I've just described, and that there are people whom I would have exempted from criticism who might have held views with which I disagreed on some of these questions. So, that's one of the weaknesses in using a term like that, that it's very difficult to cover everyone when you're generalizing. But that generalization, as I say, originally framed in America, was already in existence before I became education secretary. And in fact, in the magazine that I now edit, The Spectator, there was a cover story shortly after I was appointed, written by the then editor, Fraser Nelson, asking, "Can Gove beat the blob?" And I think it was a phrase that had actually been used briefly, I think, by Andrew Adonis as well, partly in response to a question. So it already had an existence in sort of broad conversation about the educational debate. But it's certainly the case that the approach that I took and some of the language that I used gave extra focus and attention on the term and what lay behind it.
Just, I'll come back to that again, Michael, in a minute. But I wanted sort of links to that. And this was somebody actually within Teachers Talk Radio who asked me to ask you this, and they're actually a conservative teacher, formerly a conservative teacher, and they asked me to ask you, why do you think so many teachers dislike you and the education reforms that you've brought in?
I think any reformer in any department will always end up, to an extent, irritating, at the very least, making enemies of, at worst, people in that area. Because overall, if you're a home secretary, you end up with people in the police federation hostile to what you're doing if you're driving change. If you're an environment secretary or responsible for agriculture, then it's a very difficult job to keep the farmers on side. Similarly, if you're defense secretary, you'll never secure enough resource or provide enough support for those who are serving in uniform on the front line. The politician, particularly the longer they are in office, particularly the more radical the changes they need to bring about, will inevitably at some point do something or fail to deliver in a particular way that leads teachers or anyone in that sector to be disappointed. But I'd argue that one of the things that happened during the time that I was education secretary was that the idea that there was a monolithic view amongst the profession, which had never been the case, became less so because on social media, in blogs and elsewhere, we heard the voices of teachers who were sympathetic to at least some of the things that we were trying to do in government. And in particular, there was a group of teachers who were very interested in educational research and very interested in the work of people like Daniel Willingham and so on, who were at the very least open-minded about what we were trying to do. So, of course, you're going to, in office, disappoint a significant section of the profession because you're never going to be able to fulfill all the hopes that they have in an education secretary. But I think that the two things that I draw attention to were, one, there was a group which was enthusiastic, and secondly, the changes that I did bring about were inevitably asking more of the profession, because I believe that children deserved more.
Well, I want to dig into the changes a little bit, because obviously one of the biggest changes was in curriculum. Now,
Yes.
you at the time argued for this sort of knowledge-rich and academic approach, if you like, more academic approach to education. This is sort of a two-part question, but do you think that vision has been vindicated, or do you think it's narrowed the curriculum? And I just want to share a quote with you from Becky Francis, who did the curriculum and assessment review. She said, "We've identified that some features of the current system make the delivery of a broad and balanced curriculum challenging. Responses to the call for evidence and advocates for some subjects suggest that the EBAC may constrain choices, impact students' engagement and achievement, and limit access to and time available for vocational and arts subjects." And a lot of the criticism since that time have been that subjects like music, design, technology, art, and so on have been more sidelined. And the teachers in those subjects have been more sidelined, and they've really struggled to have a voice within the education space. What would you say to Becky Francis in terms of what she said? And do you regret seeing that? Yeah, sorry, I was just going to add these. Do you regret the sort of impact of the reforms on the arts?
Well, I do, I do regret the fact that there is less engagement with the arts and less music teaching in our schools than there might be. I do also acknowledge that Becky Francis, in her curriculum review, endorsed many of the curriculum changes that we made, and it was a very measured and thoughtful piece of work. I don't agree with all of it, but nobody can take for a moment anything other than comfort and admiration from the way in which Becky Francis and her team engaged so closely with the issues and so thoughtfully. On the EBAC is not compulsory. The EBAC is simply a signaling device. It measures how well schools do in a particular suite of GCSEs, as your listeners will know. But no school is punished for choosing not to enter students for the EBAC suite of qualifications. What the EBAC did and does is tell children the truth, which is that, sadly, not all qualifications are equal in the eyes of universities and employers, that there are some qualifications which are more valued and which give you more options and greater flexibility. And until the EBAC was created or generated, then you'd have this terrible situation whereby children in schools which had a higher level of engagement with higher education, so the independent schools, grammar schools, the high-performing state schools. They knew what was required in order to get their children into a position where they could choose to go to those higher education institutions. They knew that some A-levels were worth more than others in the eyes of those universities, not necessarily in my eyes. And they guided people appropriately. And the league table system, while it's incredibly useful and one should never abandon it, it didn't provide that signaling mechanism overall. That's what the EBAC helped to do. And it links to a strong view of mine, which is that you shouldn't write children off on the basis of their background, the school they go to, the home that they come from. Every child should have the chance of an academic education, certainly to the age of 16, and the possibility of going on to higher education thereafter. We still have children of talent in this country who are not in schools which are good enough to give them that opportunity, and that's a tragedy. And the final thing is that the reasons why there's been a falling off in some arts, music, drama, and so on teaching is a matter for school leaders, because the very best schools have not done that. And blaming the EBAC is a way of avoiding the question, why aren't you, if you consider this to be important, prioritizing these subjects? And again, to see a single cause and to blame a single government and the individuals within it is an evasion of responsibility.
But there are some schools out there who have been criticised that are high performing because they've been criticised for not having enough music provision, enough drama provision, enough arts provision. They've also been criticised in some circles because some teachers have said, well, in a school that's, you know, sort of focusing on this knowledge-rich delivery, which you know has come in from your sort of time as education secretary, they've said, well, art lessons aren't practical anymore. It's sort of more focused on, I don't know, a PowerPoint with information on it rather than experimentation and creativity and all that sort of stuff. But also they've pushed, you know, the critics would say they've pushed more students away from those avenues, or those avenues have just been less available. Like, you know, you're not going to be able to do that subject until you have done this subject, or whatever it is, you know, instead of saying, oh yeah, absolutely, you've got real talent in art, so you go and do art, because art's just as valuable as something else, and we need more, you know, more of that.
Students are introduced to art and music through the national curriculum. If those subjects are well taught, then they will engage people who can be inspired by those subjects, whether or not they're going to pursue careers in those areas. They're life enhancing. So a great deal is down to the quality of teaching in those subjects. And actually, what I wanted to do is to ensure that those subjects were taught more rigorously. And so, yes, experimentation is great, but you can't really experiment effectively in art unless you've been taught, you know, basic rules of draftsmanship and perspective. And you can't really experiment in music unless you've reached a level of facility, whether that's through singing or playing a musical instrument, which comes through application. It is very often the case that creativity is used as a valuable goal to in language, to avoid acknowledging that in order to be truly creative, you have to be disciplined first. And in order to be truly creative in the arts, you need to have some understanding of the tradition within which you're working. And that degree of discipline and rigor doesn't necessarily appeal to everyone, but it's a precursor to success in those areas and to innovation in those areas.
Just to remain on the curriculum for a little bit as well. We're now in a position where schools are expected to make an unprecedented high number of reasonable adjustments to make learning and exams accessible for students. Is this because the education system, as it is discriminatory towards those with SEND needs? Do you think?
No. I think that the number of students who are living with conditions that mean that they can't fully access and enjoy all of the subjects in the curriculum is quite limited. So the number of children who have not just severe learning difficulties, but neurological and other problems that inhibit their participation in the curriculum is smaller than the current roster of children who are registered as having special educational needs. There are many needs, from those that present in terms of behavioral problems to genuine conditions that are best addressed by having a rigorous curriculum delivered in a disciplined environment in which distractions from learning are minimized and direct instruction is maximized. And many of the adjustments that are made in a well-intentioned way, but actually work against those children achieving their full potential.
Do you concede, though, that with those reforms that you brought in, particularly the knowledge-rich curriculum, the focus, as you've just said, on direct instruction, evidence-informed practice, and so on, do you think they have made it harder, though, for SEND students to access learning fundamentally?
No, absolutely not. Quite the opposite. I think that you will always find that there are those who want to find an excuse for poor academic performance. And rather than using special educational needs as an excuse, we should be specific. What is the nature of the need? What is the barrier that's created by asking students to follow an academic curriculum that, in the case of this particular condition, creates a difficulty? Why would another curriculum be better? And why would that curriculum necessarily prepare those children better for future life? So often you find that people who are enemies of promise use a genuinely noble or heart-engaging issue, like dealing with special educational needs, to avoid maintaining the high level of ambition that we need for all children. And there is no reason why children who manifest with conditions such as ADHD or children who have dyslexia cannot enjoy and benefit from a rigorous academic curriculum.
The sort of critics of the approach to the curriculum, that they would say, for example, I've seen them say that a lot of lessons now, let's imagine teachers' lesson planning, it's the critics will say that it's become very regimented and mechanical and scripted, as in, this is how you plan a lesson: do a quiz, pull out some PowerPoint slides, read off the PowerPoint slides, do another quiz, end of lesson. And the diet that a student would have in a school day would be 6 of those. And the critics are saying that's a very stilted and mundane sort of experience, learning experience for many to have. So would you see that as a result of what you've done, or a sort of mutation of what you intended to happen, or do you think that's not happening?
I'm sure it is, and it's a rejection of it. The idea of people defaulting to an unimaginative lesson plan like that is actually a betrayal of what should be going on in the classroom, and it's not what the best senior leaders and the best teachers would want to do. You can engage children with the curriculum by using pedagogical skill and exciting content within what's in the curriculum now. And quizzes and PowerPoints may have their place at certain points, but a rigid reliance on instruction of that kind, I think, is a misunderstanding of what it is that we set out to achieve.
We'll move from curriculum now, Michael, to probably one of the biggest issues facing the profession right now, which is 40 to 50,000 teachers leaving every year, and more and more of them seemingly wanting to get out.
Yes.
And it's worsened significantly. It really has over the years. And is this a consequence of long-term policy decisions, including your own?
I think it's a consequence of a variety of things, but I'd love to know what teachers themselves are saying. So I think one of the things is the broad labour market. So if it's the case that you have qualifications in a particular area and you choose to go into teaching, you're doing something noble. And it can often be the case that qualifications in that area can earn you far more money in a different field. And so whether it's professional services or whether it's working in business or indeed in other parts of the public sector, you can often earn more. I consistently argued for support for good salaries for teachers, for greater flexibility over how teachers were paid, and for doing everything that we could at a time of retrenchment to look after teachers' pensions, because I recognize that financial reward is a factor, but perhaps not the most important. Perhaps the most important is the environment in which teachers operate. And I think that one of the things that I certainly hear, but again, this is anecdotal, is that it is behavior that is one of the classroom behavior that is one of the biggest factors leading to people leaving the profession, that low-level disruption in the classroom, or when efforts are made to enforce good behavior or to demonstrate and to model good behavior, that individual teachers do not receive the support that they need from senior leadership teams and others. And we also see that in the way in which, over time, there's been something of a campaign against, for example, the use of exclusion. We can go into exclusion, alternative provision, and some of the weaknesses there which do need to be addressed. But the biggest single cause, I think, is the frustration that teachers feel that the ability to ensure that they can share their gifts with a class are not supported by the right approach towards dealing with poor behavior overall.
Well, let's focus in on behavior just briefly then, because it is a big issue, especially at the moment. So if you were Education Secretary now, what would you do then different to actually say, yeah, we're going to make behavior better, or we're going to help these teachers? Because I'm sure there'll be a lot of teachers out there now going, behavior's getting worse, and
yes,
that's it. Right. So what are you saying you'd actually do to make that better?
Well, I think that firstly, and it sounds like an evasion, but it's the most important thing, is to research deeply what the real reasons for poorer behavior might be. So to what extent is it the case that parents are not supporting teachers in their work? To what extent are parents not supporting adult authority in the classroom? To what extent is it the case that post-pandemic, or with the increased use and reliance on social media by young people, that there are not just distractions in the classroom, but influences outside the classroom that inhibit both children from behaving better and from teachers and other adult authority figures from being able to impose that authority? But, you know, some of the things that are being debated at the moment, which indeed the government are bringing forward, I would support. So I would say that no child should be using a smartphone or any such device in school. The broader ban on social media for under 16s, I'm very sympathetic to. I think also it should be the case that we need to improve the quality of alternative provision such that it is easier to exclude disruptive children. And one of the things that we should also do is to make sure that it is not the case that schools feel or heads feel that they shouldn't exclude disruptive children, but they should be responsible in league tables for every child that was originally on their roster right from the beginning. What do I mean by that? So
Yeah,
a child arrives in exactly. So a child arrives in year 7, or children arrive in year 7. You've got your school complement. That child becomes so disruptive that you feel that you need to permanently exclude. Okay, you can, but you are responsible for that child's academic performance, whichever institution they then enter. Therefore, you cannot evade responsibility for that child's welfare and academic achievement. And so you can't just exclude and then hope that the alternative provision will be sufficient. You have to ensure that the alternative provision will be sufficient, because you can't off-roll disruptive students and then not expect it to have an impact on your overall league table performance.
Do you think league tables have helped, Michael, in terms of schools, in terms of their recruitment of teachers, in terms of their retention of teachers? I mean, I guess that comes back to a big question I've got for you, which is more overarching, which is, who do you see as the main stakeholders in education?
Children.
Okay. If that's the case, then why did you say that education's become too child-centric?
Because so child-centered are the idea that you have a notion that children can discover and can learn from each other. You know, the whole sort of Paulo Freire, Vygotsky type thing. I think doesn't work. The evidence is that it doesn't work. Children benefit most from being in an ordered and disciplined environment where adult authority is clear. That's a responsibility on adults to model that authority and to share knowledge. But the best thing for children is for them to be in school and learning. That's why, for example, the level, though it's brought down a little recently, of persistent absence is such a big problem as well. So child-centered learning doesn't help children. Direct instruction and discipline helps children, and that's the single most important thing.
Okay, I mean, flipping back to the teacher, to the behaviour things that you were mentioning, and the teacher side of things, we're seeing increasing reports at the moment of violence against teachers.
Yes.
Particularly just yesterday, actually, it was in Scotland, where I think the Daily Mail reported that there's on average 5 teachers a day who are ending up needing medical treatment for things that are happening to them. Is it now less safe for teachers than when you left office?
I don't know. I can't say definitively, but it is certainly the case that it's worrying. Obviously, one of the problems in Scotland is that schools can't effectively exclude disruptive pupils. There is a means by which exclusion can take place in Scotland, but you have to go through essentially a much more protracted process, even than that which exists in England. I regularly visit my hometown of Aberdeen, which has been one of the worst affected by this epidemic of poor behavior. And again, the emphasis on the wrong sort of inclusion there has worked against maintaining order in classrooms. More broadly, there are issues in society which, exacerbated by the pandemic, exacerbated by other issues like social media, which have borne down on children's mental health, that have created problems. And of course, we need to consider those as well, and consider that it's not upon teachers and head teachers alone that all of the responsibility for maintaining order should devolve, but nevertheless we should empower teachers and head teachers to have the tools to deal with it. And again, you know, another issue should be asking if on the one hand, are children's services intervening early enough in homes where children are growing up, where they are suffering from abuse and neglect and sometimes witness to domestic violence? They're not. But also, is it the case that the police and others are dealing effectively with manifestations of antisocial behavior and gang behavior, not just in our big cities, but in many of our towns? No, they're not either. So I do sympathize with the position that teachers find themselves in when there are so many things that are happening outside the classroom that make their job more difficult.
So should there be some sort of national zero tolerance framework for teachers when it comes to violence and things like that?
Yes, absolutely. It's certainly the case that all the policies necessary should be put in place. The idea that you can have knives taken in to school and the risks that come about as a result of it is disgusting. And again, one of the things that we did right at the very beginning is that we changed the rules on how teachers, or indeed any appropriate adult, can search a student when they entered school. It was the case that there were restrictions on the capacity of teachers and others to search children and young people when they were entering schools. We lifted those restrictions. I think it's worth looking at every single aspect of what teachers are prevented from doing and what others should do to help teachers, so that they do not have to put up with this. And it is not unrealistic to insist that you should not have violence of any kind in a school environment. I know that sometimes people will say, well, you can't prevent, they might use euphemisms, you can't prevent a certain degree of boisterousness and so on. In the classroom, students should be learning, and there should be ways of channeling energy and the natural desire for physical activity and the competitive outlet that many young people will have. But in the classroom, people should be studying and learning and experiencing and growing. And also, almost every student we would hope would enter the world of work. Behavior of that kind would not be tolerated, should not be tolerated in any workplace.
One of the things with that people have also looked at, and we won't have a huge amount of time on this, but I'd like to touch on it, is obviously the academy system, free schools, and so on. One of the things that did, I guess, is to give freedom on things like pay, for example, and more freedoms there. Do you think, what's your view on figures that were published this week, or were found this week, compiled this week by TES, on the pay of academy CEOs? And, a lot of the pay they were getting was upwards of, well, let's just say it was about double what the Prime Minister's on, and more. So we're talking 250,000. I think the highest paid is about 500, half a million for an academy CEO. And a lot of teachers are saying, well, if we've got a funding crisis and teaching assistants, because I don't know, Michael, I'm not an expert on what you did when you were education secretary on pay, but what I do know is historically teaching assistants have really not been paid very well. So I suppose my question is twofold. Should anyone working in education, even at the top end, be earning that sort of money? And secondly, what would you do in terms of the funding now, and in terms of how schools and teachers are funded?
So the first thing is, everything depends on performance. So if you have the CEO of a multi-academy trust that is responsible for or presiding over high performance, and we can debate what that means, and some people will have a very different view from me, then that money is merited. So if you are ensuring that children have the opportunity and the enjoyment within those schools that gives them the chance to flourish thereafter that they wouldn't otherwise have had, then great. I have no problem with that. There's a broad principle, which I think is applied in organizations like John Lewis and, as it happens, the Navy, that the person at the top shouldn't be paid more than a specific multiple of the person at the bottom, however defined in the salary scale. As a general rule, I think that's a good thing for organizations, but I wouldn't seek to impose it by legislation. I would say that is, a generally good principle. And I imagine that most organizations would want to have some form of philosophy guiding how people are rewarded, so that everyone feels that it's fair. By fair, I don't mean flat. I do mean that there's a justification for everyone earning what they earn. More broadly, I do think that we need to consider and prioritize investment in education. And again, that nothing is more important than attracting, retaining, and paying good people well.
If I had a class then, Michael, which I'm very lucky to have one at the moment, where I think they're all going to do really well in their exams. Does that make me a high performer?
Well, I'm sure you are, but it's also the case that one would have to look at these things. So if it's the case that you're teaching, I don't think it's the case in your case, Tom, but if you're teaching
it might be.
a sixth form in a grammar school in one of the leafiest parts of Bucks or Kent, then they're all going to do well anyway. I mean, you might be a brilliant teacher, you might not, but just because they get great A-level results, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're great. Conversely, if you're teaching students in a comprehensive and you have a range of abilities in your class and you're teaching GCSE and those students all get good passes, and some of those students are living in really tough circumstances, then you really are delivering. So context determines whether or not someone as a teacher is exceeding expectations for themselves and for students and so on. So I think that context is right. You know, obviously, people will say that no system can be so subtle that it takes account of every contextual factor, and I take that point. You have to have, with all forms of measurement, there will always be rough edges, as it were. But I think overall, you can look at different ways, and our progress measures are designed to do this, to show how value is being added.
Would you recommend teaching today to someone you knew?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
Because I think that there are a few things more rewarding than seeing people flourish as a result of your investment of time and care in them.
But there's not a teacher out there, Michael, who doesn't love teaching.
Exactly.
Find me a teacher out there, and you say, "Do you enjoy being in the classroom teaching?" And I would struggle to find many who were half decent at the job who wouldn't say, "Yeah, I really love it." It's all the other stuff, isn't it? So I think but I'm saying that hasn't. There'll be a lot of people out there saying that hasn't changed. Nothing's changed. We're 20, 30 years in. My parents are both teachers, Michael. They had to sort of, I don't know if they reached the end in terms of before their retirement. The idea of some teachers now saying, "Can I get to 68?" Is something they look at and say with all the stuff. And when you look at Ofsted and you look at, I know you mentioned the EBAC earlier, the performance tables, the pressure, the accountability, the behaviour. Now, that's the only reason I'm not saying why would you recommend teaching as a job, because there's loads of teachers out there who love it. But I'm saying, how could you recommend it given the context that teachers are working in at the moment?
I think accountability measures are always going to be necessary. We can have a debate over how to improve them, and it's certainly the case that we changed league tables in different ways when we were in government, and I and my colleague and friend David Laws looked at what we considered to be very good reasons, which came from the profession, as to why the league tables that we inherited weren't working as effectively as they should. And I'm sure it's the case that there'll be scope for revision now. And as I say, I will strongly defend the EBAC, but I would always look at evidence. If I happened to be the education secretary tomorrow, I'm not going to be, but if I happened to be, I would ask.
Could be if you went to reform, they might be looking for someone.
But I'd ask to see the evidence and say, is it achieving what we hope to achieve? Both what's the statistical evidence, but also what's the personal evidence from a variety of schools and a variety of situations about how it may or may not have skewed incentives. Similarly, I'd ask, as you've quite rightly done, what can we do to improve behaviour? And I'd also look at the way in which Ofsted is operating. And I would say, is it the case that it's incentivizing the wrong sort of behaviour? Is that because of a misunderstanding of what Ofsted is looking for? Is it because of the quality of the people within the inspectorate and so on? So I'd ask these questions.
Do you doubt that, Michael? Do you doubt the quality of the people in Ofsted?
I have no reason to. Overall, on the basis of what I know now, believe that Ofsted has been well led and it has very good people working in it. But
do you think it was well led under Amanda Spielman?
Yes, very. And I very strongly support Amanda and believe that she was a superb leader of Ofsted and chief inspector. But even with the very best leaders, there will be occasions where, and even with the best intentions and the best evidence, there will be occasions where you can look back, learn, and say, right, that was fine, or that was, half decent. But this is how we improve. And we learn that by having, I think, a granular look at what's working and what isn't. Again, one of the things that all of us are going to have to confront is that within every profession, technology is going to change how we operate, and technology may or may not render inappropriate some of the practices with which we've all grown up. So, of course, even if I felt that things were absolutely tickety-boo in every area, and they can't be, then you'd need to review how we're operating, not seeking upheaval, but certainly seeking to make sure that those areas that weren't working well were improved. And teachers' voices are not just integral, but they should be a guiding light in that process.
Mm. Just before, because we've got two teachers, Michael, who are going to come on next, and they're going to sort of ask you their own questions and add to what we've talked about so far today. But before we bring them on, I just want to give another shout out to our partners on the show tonight. That's AQA, who are fantastic. And if you haven't heard of AQA, then they work closely with teachers. They combine insight with their assessment expertise to create resources, tools, training, and guidance that make a difference. And you can find out more on their website, especially with exam season on the horizon. And our other partner, Hachette Learning, who are publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Right, Michael, we've got Liz and we've got Yasmin. Welcome, Liz and Yasmin. These are our fellow hosts from Teachers Talk Radio. Just a very brief introduction, Yasmin and Liz, as to what you do currently, your job and that.
Sure. Hi, Michael. I'm an assistant head teacher currently at Haringey Learning Partnership, and I was also in school during your time as the Education Secretary.
Yes, and we're lovely to see you.
Thank you.
I'm an English teacher in the south of England. I've been a teacher for 20 years, and I was a teacher during your time as Education Secretary.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you.
Brilliant. Right. Yasmin, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, sure. So the first question that I wanted to ask you was, you were saying earlier to Tom that sometimes SEN can be used as an excuse. So I wanted to ask you, what does inclusion mean to you, and where do reasonable adjustments fall into that?
I think that we want to ensure that as many students as possible can learn in a mainstream environment. And I think that the precursor to that is being clear about the nature of the special educational needs that children have. Because SEND as a label covers everything from really severe learning difficulties and also from challenges like hearing loss and visual impairment, through to children who are on the autistic spectrum, through to children who are living with ADHD and other conditions, and working out how to deal with them, which students may need to be in special schools with the equipment and training necessary to help them lead a flourishing life, and which children can be in a mainstream environment, and what that adjustment is. I think that is detailed work, but it is not the case, I think, that simply because a child may be living with autism or living with ADHD, that they are not capable of accessing an academic curriculum.
Okay, I'm going to kind of bounce off of that with a question about the curriculum. So, as I said, I'm an English teacher, and under your tenure as Education Secretary, with the reforms that came in, we saw an absolutely huge change to the English curriculum. Some might argue unnecessary narrowing of the content of the curriculum. We saw beautiful pieces of literature coming off the curriculum in favour of what has been nicknamed male, pale and stale as a curriculum. What was the evidence base behind this choice?
Again, one of the key questions that I'd ask is, what was it that was removed and what was it replaced with? Because when it came to the curriculum overall, certainly the English literature curriculum, I don't recall that there were any particular edicts from us about texts that needed to be expunged. I think it was a high level of ambition overall that we certainly put in. But please do let me know, both now and subsequently as well, where you think that wonderful works were sidelined or excised from what was available to students.
So, for example, a book that we always taught, just one example that I can think of, was To Kill a Mockingbird. That was removed from the curriculum. It teaches extremely important lessons about the value we place on people and the way that we treat people. And because the curriculum was narrowed down to just books and poetry and things like that, the diverse poems that we looked at were all removed from the curriculum. And I just was interested as to why they went.
Well, this gives me the perfect opportunity. To Kill a Mockingbird wasn't removed from the curriculum.
It was at GCSE level.
No. All we did at GCSE was to say that there was a requirement to teach at least one 19th century English novel. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't also teach other texts as well, whether that's To Kill a Mockingbird or anything else. And it's also the case that, of course, there will be some requirements at GCSE, and we were making it more stretching, absolutely. But that doesn't mean that you can't teach To Kill a Mockingbird at Key Stage 3. It doesn't mean that you can't teach it alongside any text that might be examined. So there was no edict to remove. There was only an addition of a 19th century English novel to what was already existing. Similarly with poetry, I think that it's a good thing if students are familiar with pre-20th century poetry, but there's absolutely no censorship or removal of contemporary poetry written in English from any source, quite the opposite. But if we are teaching English literature, then I think that we want to make sure that children have an opportunity to read the best that's been written from a variety of sources and traditions. So I'm glad that you asked the question, because there absolutely was not any excision of To Kill a Mockingbird, just an addition of one more novel.
Except that the set texts that were on the exam board that were going to be studied was narrowed very, very dramatically. And also the curriculum, because you've gone for a knowledge-rich curriculum, which I totally accept your reasoning on that, because it was absolutely jam-packed. We haven't had the space. We would love to teach a variety of things, but because we had so much content, we have so much content to plow through. I couldn't get through another novel with them. There wouldn't be the time. So it's a lovely idea, but it's just not feasible in the timetable time that we have.
One of the challenges always is that if we're going to add things to the curriculum, and I did, then of course there's a potential opportunity cost. But one of the things I'd be curious about are those things which were added to the curriculum that you felt were in a way not the sorts of things that students should be learning, or not given time constraints. I mean, I know that you're not saying that they shouldn't have the opportunity to read as widely as possible, but I'd be curious to know what the additional requirements were that you and your students found to be a pain or less attractive than the alternatives.
It wasn't that they were less attractive or that they were a pain, because obviously we do what we're told, we follow the curriculum, we then choose from the limited scope that we were given, and we go and we deliver it with enthusiasm. I am passionate about literature from wherever it comes from, but and the students don't know any different, because of course we deliver it as best we can. But to have those options removed from us is heartbreaking, and I do think that the students are getting a more audience. And of course we give them reading lists, we make recommendations about what they're going to go away and read, because we still want to give them those opportunities. I have conversations with students outside of the classroom all the time when they ask for recommendations, and To Kill a Mockingbird is always on my list amongst others that were removed from the curriculum, but it's not exposing all of them to it. And I think that's a shame.
You know, I do appreciate the point that there are constraints. I mean, but one of the things that I'd love to know is, given the limited time, what we might dispense with in order to make time for some of the texts that you would like to teach, have enjoyed teaching, and believe could inspire. Because again, it has to be, you know, again, we could have a longer school day. Teachers could be recruited in greater numbers. We could reward them better, and we could expose children to a wider range of voices. But in the absence of those, then we both accept that there have to be some limitations on what's in both in the national curriculum, but also in exam syllabuses. And there's, as we both know, slightly different things. They're obviously connected. The exam syllabus, the GCSE syllabus, doesn't say you only need to study one novel, though it does prescribe the fact that there is a requirement for a 19th century English novel, but you could teach beyond that if there were time and a willingness. But to return to my essential point, the key thing would be to know what it is that should go in order to make space for that greater degree of flexibility that I know in your hands would be well deployed.
It's a case of the fact that we have set text lists and the exam contains set texts, and so we ask questions, we prepare them for that because we know they're going to be asked on one of those. The list could be longer, which is what it was initially. It was a longer list, but I feel like I'm hogging all the time now.
No, not at all. Well, I'd want to check with the exam board as well, because there may be a specific problems. I mean, AQA, who are the partners for this program, are a great exam board, and their chair is an old friend, David Laws. But something else that I'd love to do, and out of genuine interest and curiosity, and because it's so important, is if you were to share with me both the sort of current exam board requirements that you're concerned about, and maybe some from the past or some elsewhere, so that if nothing else, I can learn in greater detail where your concerns lie, and if necessary, on reflection, if I think that we've got things wrong and they've moved in the wrong trajectory. I don't think we have, but if I am wrong, then I can give an exclusive apology to you and to Tom on this channel.
Let's move to Yasmin. I think Yasmin's got another question. Yasmin?
Yeah, I've got one last question that I want to ask, as I was a disadvantaged child when I was at school. So you said earlier to Tom that some qualifications are of more value. So I wanted to ask you, would you say you've contributed to capping disadvantaged students, say through the removal of things like EMA? So even if we look at last year, a third of children failed to achieve a grade 4 at GCSE in English and maths, whilst the prerequisites for things like A-levels are continuing to rise. So would you say that disadvantaged children are better off or worse off today?
I think they were better off just before the pandemic. All the evidence shows that we were narrowing the attainment gap, and we did so by a variety of means. One was by making sure that there was more additional resource going in to help disadvantaged students through the pupil premium, and secondly, by changing the method of accountability for schools, both so that it took account of the performance of pupil premium students and also so that it looked at progress. Obviously, poor prior attainment is correlated to, but not always exactly ironclad linked to poverty. So all of those things worked together in order to put an emphasis on students doing better. I think most of the academic research suggests that the EMA in and of itself didn't really improve attainment. And again, also the raising of the participation age, which Ed Balls introduced and which I supported, I think worked against or removed some of the need and or justification for the EMA. So in tackling both underperformance overall, and in particular the barriers that children from disadvantaged backgrounds face, you need to have targeted resource, preferably early on, and then schools that are fairly held to account for the progress that those children make.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Liz, any other questions?
Have I got time for one more question?
We've got maybe time for one or two more.
Okay, I just wanted to ask, you said that you endorsed Amanda Spillman's time in Ofsted, but I would be remiss not to mention Ruth Perry and what happened to Ruth Perry under the pressure of Ofsted, under Amanda Spillman's reign, as it were. So what are your thoughts about what happened to Ruth Perry and the pressures of Ofsted?
I think that when you have someone who takes their own life, it's an unimaginable tragedy. And one of the things that I've learned is that when you're dealing with something as tragic and often as complex as suicide, then you shouldn't attribute it to a single cause. And so there are lessons that were learned from that inspection. But it's also the case that to suggest that Ofsted alone would contribute to any individual taking their life, I think is, as I understand it, a misunderstanding of the general rules that should apply when considering anyone taking their own life.
But the tribunal did say that that was a significant contributing factor, the inspection and the inspection.
Yeah, so that was the case. The coroner's report, you're absolutely right,
Yeah.
did say that. But I think that in that respect, the coroner erred, and I think that the overall impact of Amanda's leadership was excellent. And I think one of the key questions there was the problems that were found in that school, or allegedly found again, related to safeguarding. And there's a question mark, and it's an open debate about the extent to which safeguarding being a limiting judgment created problems for Ofsted. And that's about the legislative framework that ministers created, not one that the chief inspector was implementing. So ultimately, the fault would lie with the ministers, that's me, who designed and legislated for that framework, not for the people implementing it. So
she did, but Amanda Spielman did come out afterwards on 2 or 3 podcasts and news interviews, and she didn't show. I mean, I'm saying this on a personal level, but there'll be lots out there who would say the same thing, that they felt that she didn't show any attrition. She didn't show any, I'm sorry about what's happened. This system isn't working. We need to change it, or something needs to change.
Well, it is certainly the case that I know Amanda well, and I'm a huge supporter of what she did. I know that she was personally affected by what happened. But I also think that she owes everyone, as we all do, both a thoughtful and a sensitive, but also a detailed response to these concerns. And as I say, I think that the subsequent attempts to say that Amanda and Ofsted were responsible, I think, that is not how I believe that people should respond to the questions of suicide, which are inevitably more complex. That's the point that almost any medical practitioner or anyone involved in psychology would make. And more broadly, the challenges that Ofsted has with safeguarding are not of Ofsted's making, they're of ministers' making.
Michael, unfortunately, we have run out of time. I've got one question, Michael, to finish off with, a quick fire one. What's your 5-year plan? Have you got a 5-year plan? What's your next thing? What's your next big thing?
I don't. I am enjoying being no longer an MP. I'm sure that everyone listening is probably just as glad as I am. And I am enjoying.
I was your constituent.
Thank you. Where did you teach, Liz?
I've taught around Surrey, Berkshire, and Hampshire.
Okay.
So.
But you didn't teach in one of the secondary schools in my constituency, or?
I did.
Not to worry. Oh, right. Well, anyway, what I would say is that I'm looking forward now to reading, writing, and admiring what politicians do from afar. But the thing that I will do in the next fortnight, if Liz can share with me through you, Tom, her observations, then I will treat them in confidence, and then write back to you with my thoughts. And then Liz, if you want to publish anything that I've said, great, but I shall respect your confidence, much as I respect the brilliant work that you and Yasmin and Tom do.
Michael, it's just to say thanks very much for
thank you.
Honestly, fantastic that you have given the time to whatever anybody thinks about your
it's a pleasure.
sort of decisions and policies or whatever else. You have taken the time to talk directly to teachers, and I think that's something a lot of politicians don't tend to do. So I find. No, irrespective of anything else, I benefit so much personally from hearing from people, even with those with whom I disagree. And I always want to know, direct and unvarnished, what people think, why they think it, and even if people are frustrated because they don't think that I'm listening, I am so grateful to people who do. Michael, can I just ask, just because it's burned on me for like 10 years, and I've just got to ask you, do you regret Brexit?
No.
How though? How do you not regret it?
That is another conversation. Probably take another hour.
All right. Listen, thanks, Michael. And thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Thanks to AQA and Hachette Learning for supporting the show this evening. Of course, if you're in Manchester on the 14th of March, then come along to Teachers Talk Connect as well. Meet the team, hear from other teachers. It's free for teachers to attend. Make sure you get over there. Head to the website, ttradio.org. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you're watching this on YouTube or if you're listening to it through a podcast platform, do leave us a review or a rating. Every little helps us to grow. Huge thanks to everyone who's joined in tonight. Lots of comments on the feed, and we'll sort of reflect back on them later. Thanks very much, Michael, and thanks.
No, thank you. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Liz. Thanks, Yasmin, and thanks to everyone watching.
Bye, everyone.
Outstanding, a world-class vision, a world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused